Hi, welcome to the video on alternate achievement literacy supporting comprehension. So the lesson objectives for this video are that you'll be able to design meaningful activities to assess comprehension of grade level texts in an AAL lesson, incorporate evidence-based practices for teaching and supporting comprehension, including the system of least prompts, and use technology to support student independence in alternate achievement literacy. So let's review the two goals for literacy. One is we want to make sure we're always increasing students' access to text, but we also want to increase their independence as a reader. Our instruction should reflect the changing priorities over the grades. So as a review, this is the model of literacy from Browder et al. In 2008, so that at the elementary grades, just like the standards reflects, students should be provided a lot of opportunities using systematic explicit instruction on how to read, decoding, whether that is concept of word and sight word and the alphabetic principle up through decoding and fluency. And you notice that doesn't go away in secondary grades, right? And then this quote unquote functional reading or more personal applications should be more tailored to those individuals as they get closer to transition age. But throughout school, there should be a consistent emphasis on shared stories of both narrative and informational texts. So what is a narrative text, right? It's that first literature that a novice reader learns to read and comprehend. It's what we commonly use with young children in an elementary school. The purpose is generally to entertain by telling a story. So if we think about novels, short stories, biographies, the story elements that we focus on are things like the characters, setting, conflict, plot, the author's point of view or author's purpose. So here's an example of a great book, Kina Ford and the Field Trip Mix-Up, where she goes on a field trip to Washington, D.C. And then we have informational texts. Those, the purpose is to inform the reader. So these are what students are going to encounter and be using as we quote unquote transfer to reading to learn, that like third grade mark forward. So more academic content areas, they may contain some of the same story elements as narrative text. For example, if we're reading a nonfiction biography, if we're reading a historical book that's telling a true story of something that happened, that's still going to have a plot and author's point of view. So here's an example of a companion text that could go along with the prior book about exploring the White House. So true story of what happens inside the White House. So we're planning for alternate achievement literacy. As a review, we want to choose the state standard from the grade level and a grade aligned text activity. We want to adjust the text complexity as needed through adaptations so that it's cognitively and physically accessible to the student, and then use systematic instruction to teach engagement, vocabulary, and the related comprehension skills. So we teach engagement with the text. We want to make sure we're teaching the vocabulary, both from the text and the objective. And then we want to teach comprehension of the text, related language skills, as we'll talk about, and then writing. So to promote comprehension, the National Research Panel recommends 6 strategies: comprehension monitoring, cooperative learning, graphic and semantic organizers, question answering, question generation, so students creating their own questions, and summarizing. Okay, so the National Reading Panel made these recommendations based on a review of research, but it did not target students with disabilities, much less students with more extensive support needs, partially because when this review took place, this was not one of the instructional priorities for these students. This just wasn't where our field and where the science was at the time. Since then, most of the research for students with extensive support needs has taken place in question answering, right? But there are ways that we can support other types of comprehension activities within our instruction. So what are the research-based strategies for teaching comprehension? Using accessible texts. So we want to make sure, again, that it's cognitively and physically accessible. Making sure that we're explicitly teaching vocabulary, right? If the student doesn't know what main idea means, or if they don't understand the word setting, and then we ask them a question, what was the setting of chapter 2? and they get the answer wrong, we can't really understand why they got it wrong. Did they truly not understand, that chapter 2, the setting was at the grandma's house, or is it that they just don't understand what I'm asking? Right. So we want to make sure that we are teaching vocabulary from the objective as well as vocabulary from the text so they can really understand what's happening. We can also use visual supports and graphic organizers, and then we need to use systematic instruction to teach them how to use those visual supports and graphic organizers. So let's first talk about constructing questions. So we've read the text, and lots of thought needs to go into the types of questions that we ask. So I want to begin with talking about Bloom's taxonomy. This may be familiar to some, it might be a new concept to others. Bloom's taxonomy is a set of cognitive objectives. It's a way of creating a hierarchy of complexity as far as cognitive complexity of questions. So cognitive objectives are universal and they can apply to all populations. So they can apply to whether we're working with preschoolers, with middle and high schoolers, with undergraduates, with graduate students. We can use these objectives to create a taxonomy from less cognitively demanding to the most cognitively demanding. But we don't introduce all levels at once. Just like a pyramid, we need to make sure that we can work our way up or know where our students are. Again, whether our students are preschoolers, middle schoolers, graduate students, and then work our way higher up. So here's an example of Bloom's taxonomy. Again, this is reinforced in the textbook. So at the very bottom is knowledge. So those are questions that require fact recall, recognition. And then when we have that knowledge, that then builds into comprehension type questions. So being able to translate and interpret based on understanding of the facts. One level above that would be application. So being able to take your understandings and apply them in a new way. Above that is analysis. So being able to take your understanding and break it down into parts. Synthesis is combining those parts into a whole, and evaluation is making a judgment of some sort. So I'm going to give some examples of how questions, even within the same level of Bloom's, can be differentiated for complexity. Okay, so let's think about knowledge level questions. These questions are going to have answers on the page, or you may have heard those as right there answers. So an example of an easy question would be, point to the title, point to the author. Can you show me a picture of the grandma, or Jill went up the hill? Who went up the hill? Right after I read something and having them repeat that. Another still knowledge question, but a little more difficult, would be a medium level, would be like, who is the story about? What did they put in the soup? And a little bit more difficult would be like, who else is in the story? So asking for an expansion or building on. Moving up into the comprehension level, an easy level comprehension question. Again, answers can be inferred from what is right on the page. So I can refer back to the text to get help or find the answer. Something easy would be just like, what happened last? So a type of sequencing question. Now, medium would be put these events in order as first, second, last, right? So that's more complex because instead of just making one judgment of, what happened last, so I could go back and look in the story, it would be having to manipulate multiple events. And the hardest would be put these pictures in order to show what happened in the story. Maybe if we had more than 3 pictures. Next level up would be application. This requires the student's own background knowledge. So this reinforces the importance of making sure that we're building their background knowledge to make sure that we are anchoring our instruction, explicitly teaching vocabulary, and giving students meaningful ways to show what they know. So an easy example would be like, the bear is eating. Are you eating? Medium level question would be something like, Johnny was in a lot of trouble. What might you do if you were in a lot of trouble? And then a more difficult question would be, this article is about whales. Where do whales live? That could be a right there question, but then build onto it. What else do you know about whales? That could be something from their personal knowledge, maybe from a video that you watched as a class or a field trip you went on, or something else that they have read in the text. And so can they elicit one more thing? And then analysis, where we want to break information into different parts so that we can analyze it. So an easy level would be something like, let's put these pictures into two columns. One is for what Sarah did in the story, and the other column is for what you do, right? So being able to analyze what was it that the character did, what was it that they might do. A medium level would be something like, let's make a diagram for what we know about each person in our story. Hunting, who went hunting? Right. So being able to break the information into parts, match the character's personality traits or character's events, maybe their opinions with them. And then more difficult would be something like when the girls laughed at Renee, how did the girls feel? How did Renee feel? Right. And these types of questions, especially when we're trying to make inferences into a character's point of view or an author's point of view, can be difficult for some of our students who are on the autism spectrum. And it really taps into that theory of mind of being able to think about another person's point of view. And so in a minute, I'll talk about some strategies for how we can support that comprehension, because it's not enough to say, well, that's going to be tough for them. Right. That's even more of a reason that we need to give them a strategy to work on how to answer those types of questions. And then finally, synthesis. That's where we're combining the parts of the whole, right? So analysis, we would be breaking it apart. Synthesis, we want to kind of see the whole picture. So these are main idea type questions, like show me a picture of what the story is all about. More medium would be something like, what might be another title for this story? And a more difficult question would be something like, what will happen to people if they have no job? So maybe we read a news story about employment rates, or maybe about a new business opening in your town. Maybe an Amazon distribution center is coming and it's going to make a bunch of more jobs. And then you asked a question like, what would happen if you didn't have a job? An evaluation then takes that critical thinking to another level where they're making a judgment according to a standard. So maybe, what do you think about this story? Can they state their own opinion? Did this really happen, or is it fiction? So that can they take the standard of, is this true or not true, and make that judgment? Or why did the author write this, right? So those author's purpose type questions, to persuade, to entertain, that is an evaluation question. Thankfully, and especially if you go to Google, you can find all kinds of objective banks. I still use these. I find them very helpful for writing objectives aligned to Bloom's taxonomy. Now, caveat is simply using one of these verbs does not automatically indicate that it is that level of Bloom's, but it definitely can be a good starting point for thinking about, what is it that I'm asking the student to do right now, and where are they in their phase of learning? Is this an appropriate comprehension question? How can I make sure that I'm giving them the appropriate amount of challenge and the appropriate amount of support? Okay, so knowledge questions, we're going to have a lot of things like name, recall, state, select. Now, here's an example. What if you had like select the picture? The student will select a picture that represents the main idea. That's not a knowledge level question just because I had that word select, right? So that would be an example of how you can't only go based on these words, but it's a really good place to start. All right. WH questions, right, that we see on many of our students, especially in elementary schools, both comprehension IEP goals, as well as their speech and language IEP goals. Those can also be linked to Bloom's taxonomy of knowledge. So for example, where do plants and animals live? Especially if that is based on a text that you just read, that would be an example of a knowledge level question. What kind of population do frogs belong to? That's analysis, because I'm having to categorize and match to a certain standard. Why is rain important to plants? I'm having to put lots of things together to have an overarching reason. What would happen after planting a tree in good soil? That's just a comprehension level question if that's in the text. Why is the forest floor dark? Again, that's synthesis and putting a lot of pieces together. And then who can harm the environment would just be a knowledge level question because it's likely going to be in the text. Okay, now that we've talked about the types of questions we may want to include, now let's talk about teaching students to answer questions using the system of least prompts. So this is an evidence-based practice for supporting comprehension. And the goal, the target, is teaching students to refer back to the text, right? So we want to increase their comprehension and their understanding that they can go back into the text to find the answer to questions. So let's review a bit on the system of least prompts. So it is a prompt hierarchy. So initially, we just want that natural cue. They see a question or they are asked a question. There's a question on their worksheet, perhaps. And then if they don't respond or they're incorrect, we go to more and more assistance, more intrusive. I really like Sarah Collins, a doctoral student who works with us, who said in speech language, pathologists say it's minimum support, maximum, moderate support, maximum support is another way to think of it as far as your prompting hierarchy. So it's a hierarchy of prompts, also called least intrusive prompting or least to most prompting. You'll see those same words, they all mean the same thing. And we want students to progress from the least intrusive prompt, we progress as instructors from the least intrusive prompt, so the least amount of support, to the most intrusive prompt, the most amount of support. They need to respond correctly. And so that's where Sarah's translation into speechy speak of minimum support, which one is a minimally supportive, which one's moderate support, and which one's the maximum amount of support. You then need to consider, though, what the wait interval is between each prompt until the student makes a targeted response, right? The wait interval is how much time you are going to give the student to process before you provide the next level of prompt. Remember, not the same as time delay, right? Time delay is not the same as wait time or wait intervals, right? Time delay is a systematic instructional strategy. The wait interval is how much time we're giving students to respond. And SLP can be used for a variety of interventionists. So it can be implemented by peers, paraprofessionals, gen ed teacher, or special ed teacher, also parents. So here's some general guidelines for using the system of least prompts. You want to select 3 to 4 prompts in the hierarchy. You want to be careful to consider, the reason that you move between prompts is because the student's not responding or because they're getting the wrong answer. So we don't want more than 4 prompts because then the student is responding incorrectly that many times. And so learning really isn't efficient at that point. You want to remember that the prompts can definitely be adapted for students with a range of sensory impairments and needs. So students with visual impairments, we're going to focus more on our verbal prompting and physical prompts, and then students with hearing impairments, and we're going to be using more of sign and gesture and modeling. The system of least prompts is not based on going from this definite prompt to this one to this one. It's more of just for the task and for the learner. What is the minimum amount of support to the maximum amount of support? The least to the most. So it might be for some students going from just the instructional cue to a verbal prompt, to showing them, to a hand over hand physical prompt. Other students or tasks might require first an instructional cue, then I'm just going to do maybe a gesture like tapping, and then a specific verbal prompt, and then I'm going to model and show them how to do it. And that's going to be the most intrusive. And for other tasks or students, it might be I give them the cue, I gesture, I just do a light physical prompt, and then a full physical prompt. Can you think of 2 students with different learning needs, and where in the hierarchy might you begin as a least intrusive prompt for them? Why? So here's some guidelines for using the system of least prompts. First, you have to provide the instructional cue, right? So students need that natural cue to respond to. So it could be a question like, who is the main character in our story? Or, it could be related to reading the book and say, let's go ahead and get started reading. And then you wait. You always want to give the student an opportunity to make the correct response before providing any prompting on each step of the prompt hierarchy. They need the chance to respond. Use the least intrusive prompt first and then progress to more intrusive prompts until they respond to correctly. Generally, it's a 3 to 5 second delay, but again, you have to know your student and their needs. And you want to provide appropriate feedback to the student to confirm what they did to meet the expectation. When it's appropriate, use praise or a reinforcer, but it might just be like they get to go on to the next one, or the task is over, or they get to now, they've opened the book, so now the reading begins. So let's talk about that prompting hierarchy. Okay, so going back, let's say the student did not respond correctly, or they did not respond, and now we need to progress through the hierarchy. There are different types of questions, so there are going to be different suggested hierarchies to think through. So let's first talk about literal questions. So if the student is incorrect or does not respond, the first level prompt is a reread. So we're going to go back into the text and read a small excerpt that contains the answer, 2 to 3 sentences. If they get it, and represent the question. If they get it wrong again, we're going to go back into the text and read just the sentence that contains the answer. If they get it incorrect again, we're going to point to the answer in the text. If they get it wrong again, then we'll point to the answer on the response board, right? So there's an example of how, remember I said the instructional target is that we're teaching the student to go back into the text to find the answer, teaching them that that's where the answers are contained. Right? That this is what this comprehension activity is. It's we listen and pay attention to the text so that then we can answer questions based on what happened there. Again, this is just an example hierarchy. You may have to tailor it for your students. Here's a wonderful support created by Project Impact on literal recall and inferential questions. So let's take a closer look. Again, that first level prompt is a non-specific verbal. So like, let's look back into the text. I'm going to reread just that, 2 to 3 sentences, give them wait time, repeat the question. Still incorrect. Now we're going to give a direct verbal. Like, let's see if the answer is in this section. Reread just that sentence, repeat the question. And then a model. I might silently point to the answer and repeat the question. Okay, so the goal is that if the goal is to provide a chance for the student to have a unprompted correct response, then we want to give them the opportunity for a self-generated response. Okay, so we don't always need to go directly to providing response options, especially if our students are able to respond vocally. So we want to read the question, give wait time, allow that student to provide the answer, and if a self-generated response is provided, evaluate, was it correct or not? If it's correct, specific feedback. Yes, a butterfly is an insect. You got it, right? And especially if this is new for them to respond with self-generated answers or to get something independently correct, we want to super, super celebrate that. If incorrect, we're going to follow system of least prompts until the student provides the correct answer. Now, if students aren't able to generate an answer without support, then we may provide some response options. But I'll encourage you to try to give students an opportunity to respond without the response options first. So you might read the question, give wait time, and then when it's clear the student doesn't have a self-generated answer, you can remove an answer shield, right? So you can I'll have a video in a second that gives an example of this, but cover up the answer choices and then provide them that support when they show that they need it. Repeat the question. Wouldn't count that as incorrect, right? We're just giving them a chance, and touch each potential answer as you read it, right? So they need to know what those answer choices are. So here's a great example. So let's say the teacher's reading the story about the butterfly and she says, what type of little living thing is a butterfly? Erica, what type of living thing is a butterfly? Erica says, it's an insect. Teacher says, great answer, Erica. A butterfly is an insect. Okay. Now, Curtis, what type of living thing is a butterfly? It's a cow. Let's read this paragraph again. Okay, that's a non-specific verbal prompt. She's going to look back into the text, reread 2-3 sentences of the text, repeat the question. It says, I don't know. Let's read this sentence. Let's see if this answer is in this section. Point and reread, repeat the question. A caterpillar? That she points to the answer in the text. That's the model prompt. Silently pointing to the answer and repeating the question. Insect. Yes, an insect. Great job looking in the book, right? We want to reinforce that that is where the answer is coming from. So let's look at what this looked like within that text. So in the non-specific verbal level 1 prompt, we said, look back into the text and reread a short excerpt. Okay, so if the question is, what type of a living thing is a butterfly, might read, a butterfly is an insect. Before it becomes a butterfly, the insect goes through changes. Okay, and then repeat the question. What type of living thing is a butterfly? You're still not answering. The goal is that the student is going to re-listen and hear the answer, or only look for the answer within one sentence. So at this point, we're going to reread and text point. Ideally, the student is going to text point with you if you are in a small group or one-on-one setting. Okay, so we're going to reread. A butterfly is an insect. We might say, Curtis, what type of animal is what type of living thing is a butterfly? Give them wait time. Now we're moving on to a model. The goal of the model prompt is that the student is going to focus and see the answer and mimic the teacher's model. So pointing to the answer. Curtis, what type of living thing is a butterfly? I hope they're going to say insect. Okay, he's pointing to it. If needed, we can use hand over hand prompting. Level 4, if needed, if the student needs those response options, we might use full physical to touch the answer on the answer board. This goal is to engage in actively providing the answer in the response book, repeating the question, touching the answer on the text, and then on the response board, right? So we're making a connection between the text word insect and the response board word insect. We're only going to use that hand over hand prompt if necessary with small specific feedback. All right, let's take a look at what might look like.
Mom said the owners of the house we rented from were moving back soon. We had a decision to make. Who said the family had a decision to make? Right over here, let's start again. Mom said the owners of the house we rented from were moving back soon. We had a decision to make. Who said they had a decision to make? Gabriel. Who said they had a decision to make?
Oh, did we look?
Let's look. Mom said the owners of the house we rented from were moving back soon. We had a decision to make.
I found decision.
Who said they had a decision to make?
Mom, I need house.
Mom said they had a decision to make. Good job. I like how you looked back in your story. Mom said the owners of the house.
Okay, but sometimes the answer is not always right there, right? Sometimes we're supporting students with inferential questions. So we're still going to use system of least prompts, but it's going to look a little bit differently, right? So at first, we're going to use that same non-specific verbal of let's look back in the text. Okay, we're going to reread, provide wait time, repeat the question. Next, we're going to provide a direct verbal think aloud. Like, I see a clue. Point and reread and repeat the question. And then model and point to the clue and repeat the question. So read parts of the text to help the student formulate the response, just as before. Provide a clue using the text. Model a think aloud of how to come up with the response. So like, what would this look like for you? And then if needed, point to the answer on response board. So if it's a self-generated response, again, maybe our question is, why did the boys want to quit before they finished? We read the question, give the student wait time, allow them to give the answer, and evaluate, is it correct? Is it incorrect? If it's correct, we want to provide that specific feedback, reinforcing that concept. If it's incorrect, we're going to follow Cicely prompts. Not with anything like, no, that's not the answer. We don't dwell on the incorrect. We say, I think I heard it in this part of the text, or let's go back into the text to listen. We want to, again, just like with literal questions for inferential questions, we want to give students the chance to formulate that question, the answer on their own before we provide response options. So if the question is, why did the boys want to quit before they finished? In level 1, we would say, let's look back at the text for clues. This is letting them know that it might not be a right there answer. They're going to have to synthesize and put some things together. And we want to repeat the question. And if we have a response board, touch each potential answer as we read it. In the level 2 prompt, we're going to use a direct verbal prompt and saying, I see a clue. So notice before we would say, let's look back at the text for clues. They had worked hard to reach their dreams. They wanted to quit many times, but they always had each other. Now we say, I see a clue. So point and read the sentence with the clue while the student finger points, and then reread the question. So they had worked hard to reach their dreams. You could say, I see a clue. It might be because something is hard work. And then if they're still not responding correctly, we'll go to a model prompt when you model using a think aloud. Like, they had worked hard. They wanted to quit because school was hard work. And level 4, if needed, the goal is that that student actively engages in providing the answer on the response book as a check for understanding. Okay, so again, they worked hard. So we're making sure they're seeing, why did they want to quit? Because they had worked hard. Schoolwork was hard work. And we're making sure that we are providing answer, that we're reading each one of these answer choices. Let's watch an example.
Why does Playboy have a concussion? He was sad, his friend died, he had gotten hit in the head, or he walked home. Let's look back in the text. Yeah, let's look back. Okay. Do you see anything? Yeah, Johnny died. So which one does his friend? He is sad. His friend died. He had hit his head in the rumble, or he walked home. Start right here. He had a concussion and he was in shock. He was delirious and very sick. So which one do you think it is? Why does Playboy have a concussion? Was it because he was sad his friend died? He was hit in the head at the rumble, or he walked home?
So again, here are the two visual supports for us as instructors to go through the prompting hierarchies for literal recall and inferential questions. Now, sometimes we're going to need to provide discrimination training to students using examples and non-examples. This can help them to learn the vocabulary or language related to the objective, understanding parts of the story, understanding vocabulary they may need for filling out a story map. And so this strategy promotes active student responding. We can use a choral response from all students so that everyone is engaged. Students are drawing on their sorting skills, and students who don't speak can utilize an AAC device or just using the response cards. So the example, non-example procedure, we use it to teach, for example, characters, setting, not a setting, problems, what's a problem, what's not a problem, what's a solution, what's not a solution. You use it for anything where something's going to fall into one of two categories. If you'll notice here, it's always been concept and not concept, right? So solution, not a solution. Problem, not problem. Character, not character. If you notice, we're not, when we're initially teaching these concepts, doing character, setting, or problem, solution. That is much more cognitively difficult. So when we're teaching language concepts, when we're teaching vocabulary in this way, any kind of concept formation, this also can be applied to science and social studies and math and all kinds of things. We want to begin with just teaching concept versus not concept. And you want to utilize the T chart looks like a T, with appropriate headings. And then you want to ask students, is this an example or not example? So was Pony Boy a main character or not a main character? And students can respond in chorus, individually, and then you want to go through all of them. So is Pony Boy a main character or not a main character? And then it sorts. What about Michelle Obama? Was she a main character or not a main character? Right. And so it's clear then who's who. If you notice here, all the response options are people. So a way that we could provide more support to students would be as if we had some that were people and some that were not people. But cautions there would be that if you are only having students discriminate, all the people that you provide are characters, and anything that's not a main character is not a person, we don't really know if they're able to meet that objective because the discrimination is not difficult enough. I would also caution that when we select what our distractors are or non-examples, that we aren't picking things that maybe are their favorites of something, because then they might accidentally choose those or focus on those irrelevant features. You want to have students move the appropriate pieces from the T-chart to the story map. Okay, so if we're teaching them, main character from not a main character, setting from not a setting, solution from not a solution, they then are able to sort them into those appropriate components on a story map, which is a type of graphic organizer that can support comprehension. So Pony Boy was a main character. Michelle Obama was not. If it's correct, we want to praise, maybe locate it in the story. If it's incorrect, we would say, like, did you see Michelle Obama on this page? Did we read about Michelle Obama? And use the text to help the student respond using system of least prompts for inferential questions, for example. All right, let's watch this video.
Why is Randy confused? Randy has a concussion. Randy thought Ponyboy would be happy. Randy is a greaser. Why is Randy confused? Because Randy thought Ponyboy would be happy.
Yeah.
After everything, he thought he'd be happy, but he's sad.
Okay.
Yep, good job.
You can see here that they've already completed the character, not a main character T-chart sorting activity. The student has the story map, and now they're answering some inferential questions. All right, now let's watch a story-based lesson that includes both vocabulary and comprehension.
Very good. Look at you.
True.
4 for 4. You guys did great on that whole
Ocean.
I know. Well, you hurt my head. All right.
Josh, what word?
Boat.
Perfect. All right. What word? What word?
Decision.
Very good. Allison, vote. Perfect. Josh, what word? Josh, what word? Awesome.
So Jeffrey, who was coming to their school?
A famous author.
Woo! Great job, Jeffrey. Great job. All right, let's keep reading. Oh, wait a minute, guys. I saw one of our vocabulary words right there.
Famous. Famous.
Famous. That's exactly right. Where's the word famous? Perfect, Scott. Great job.
Why did Stanley and Zero drink the muddy water? I want us to open our books just a minute because that page doesn't give me any answers. I find here that it says Stanley and Zero drank muddy water, but it doesn't tell me why. Food, how do you feel? Hungry, Andrew, good. Water. How do you feel when you think of water? You feel thirsty. Let's read that sentence together. Text. They were very. So why would they drink the muddy water? Because they were
Thirsty.
thirsty. Very good. Clap and cheer. That was good.
Move means
To change places.
to change places. Very good. And what is very good? Allison, which one means to have the same opinion? Agree. Very good. Vote. Vote means to make a choice.
What did Brian Tompkin write, Darrell?
Books.
Good job, Darrell! Good job. Yes, Brian Tompkin wrote books. Let's go back and look in our story. Now read this right here.
Glasses.
And then he said,
was then the man now the light
I'm wrong. So what did he say he walked like?
a duck.
He walked like a duck. That's
Good
exactly
job,
right. Good job, Darrell. Good job, Darrell.
He got very sick from the sploosh. Who can tell us what happened to Zero? Zero drank from the jars that were easy to open.
Very good. Look at you.
Okay, so now that you've seen a couple examples, I'd like for you to pause. Let me give instructions and then pause this. So this is an excerpt from chapter 1, an adapted version of Bud Not Buddy. And you can see here the vocabulary at the top. So they have identified breakfast, foster home, suitcase, bud, and flyer. Okay, so we have a high frequency word, breakfast. We have the main character, Bud, and then we have 3 vocabulary words that we would want to target for understanding the definitions of. So what I'd like you to do is come up with a student-friendly definition for foster home, suitcase, and flyer. Okay, so practice thinking about what would a student-friendly definition of that be, and then read through chapter 1 and think about what would system of least prompts look like? What would that going back into the text and narrowing down to the answer look like for this question? What does Bud have in his suitcase? So if you asked me that question, I'm your student, and I got it wrong, how would you go through the levels? And then if I needed response options, what would they be? All right, let's talk finally about using technology to support independence and comprehension. So one way that technology can support independence and comprehension is through electronic graphic organizers. So you've seen, we showed the story map was one type of graphic organizer. It's just a visual support to make the structure of the text more explicit and concrete, and it can help us develop writing One resource is Inspiration and Kidspiration. That is something you have to pay for, but it does sort of speed up the creation of graphic organizers. You can also create them yourselves with things like the Google Suite, PowerPoint. This is an example from the Smart Notebook app. The nice thing about that is it doesn't require Wi-Fi, and you can, if you see the little speaker buttons, you can program your voice to read aloud the text. You could also use an app like Go Worksheet, which also does not require Wi-Fi. I'm going to walk you through the procedures from a research study that was with elementary students with autism and intellectual disability, where we taught them the vocabulary, how to fill out a story map, and then how to use the story map to answer questions. So first, the students were taught using time delay, 6 story elements. So they were taught character, setting, main idea, problem, solution, and outcome. And so you can see here, this is what a screenshot of Smart Notebook. Those were randomized, just like a PowerPoint slides would be. So the target definition, the target word was in the middle, and then the definitions were on the outside. So example, I would say character. What does character mean? Is it who the story is about, what the story is about? And then these response options were randomized. So the benefit of using technology is that you can go ahead and program the randomization without having to have all the cards and stuff on the table. After reviewing the story elements, the students then read short stories that were all problem and solution focused. So for example, they'd read this little short story about the flat tire. And then they would fill out the story map using the text. I'm going to use system of least prompts to support them. So first we would say, okay, who was the character? Excuse me. First I would say, okay, go ahead and fill out your story map. And then if the first level prompt, they would listen, they could press this little button and it will remind them the character is who the story is about. So instead of the interventionist or the teacher having to remind them what character means, and instead of going right back into the story, maybe they just need to remember again, oh, character's who the story's about, or problem is, what caused trouble. And then if they still didn't get it correct, then we went back into the text and read the narrowing portions and did that to fill out the graphic organizer, so that by the time the graphic organizer or the story map was completed, it was correct, right? Because we use system of least prompts. So it's going to be correct by the time it's finished. And then finally, the students would use that graphic organizer to answer questions. Now, the questions would not be like, who's the character or what was the problem? Think about it. What would be the issue with that? Right? If I just said, who's the character, then the students would learn that they can just say whatever they put in the box. Instead, it used the definition. So for example, during what time of day did this story take place? Or who were the people in the story? So it was really effective. Here's another example. This is an example of electronic graphic organizers as well as an electronic story. This is from Discovery Education. You can see here the controls at the top so that the students are able to control the read aloud. They can speed up the pace. The nice thing about Discovery Education is you can have students read similar texts but change the reading level. And then the students in this study worked on both question generation and answering questions. So the students got to generate their own question before they read the story. Okay, so if they were reading a story about electricity, then they could choose I wonder, and then they could pick one of those question stems. Did they wonder who, where, what, or when? So if they chose what, they could then choose any of these. So these would all be covered in the story, and then a question mark. So they need to know these are the 3 components of a question. And then that was one of the questions that they would answer after listening to the story. Here's a demo video.
So what is more than just a home?
No.
Okay, guys, make hands down.
There's a lot of words.
Yeah, there are a lot of words.
Next, whoa. Put up, you have to listen. You can't just choose. Put the dog
I got it.
Okay.
in the fence. That's the dog.
No.
Put the dog, you were right the first
Okay.
time. Put the dog
If you
in
just
the
push the triangle, it'll do the same thing.
That one?
Uh-huh.
A habitat is more than just a home. All animals and plants.
I'm going to. No, dog. Oh, yeah. I got two dogs.
Let's see.
A habitat is more than just a home.
Off the Misha, okay?
A habitat is more than just a home.
Excellent. You totally found it. And then you even knew that you wanted to pronounce it right and you listened to it again. Awesome, Carolyn. That was very, very good.
That video makes me so happy every time. So wasn't that awesome that you saw her referencing back to the iPad? I think she was looking at that word, right? And trying to match it. And then the awesome thing about the e-text is that they can control access, right? And so she could listen back to it and she knew what she needed to listen to and she wasn't relying on that teacher. So e-text with read aloud supports instruction, supports comprehension, independence, self-directed learning, and way more opportunities. So a few of the resources, there are so many out there. This is just a few that have been used in experimental studies with students with moderate to severe intellectual disability. One is the CAST UDL Book Builder. So you can create your own books. You can upload them. You can read books that have been created by others. There's a caveat to that, right? Others have created it. There's not really a quality control there, but it's neat that you can upload and record your own voice to add, for example, to your adapted texts. Again, Discovery Education, that's the website that you saw from that video, where you can select different nonfiction texts that's already there, the content you can rely on, and you can change the reading level. So everyone in the class, or if the gen ed class is reading about, endangered species and you need to change the reading level for your students, you can do that. And then another way is that you can upload it onto existing apps. So for example, GoBook, you can upload and record your own voice to have it read aloud. Here's another example of a student with autism and a moderate intellectual disability who's using that Discovery Science ebook, and he's listening for the answer.
You would die. From sounds.
And how did your body heal that cut, Tyler? How did your body fix the cut?
Your heart.
Let's listen again. How did your body fix the cut?
This is the cut. The test your skin.
How did your body fix the cut?
Make your new cells and having cells in your skin.
Very good. It made new cells. Very nice.
So I hope that you were able to catch that he said, stop. He heard when he knew the answer. So that's the power of using technology and teaching students how to use those supports, because they've learned that they're listening for a specific purpose. So another resource for for accessible materials is the National Instructional Materials Access Center. There are educational publishers that have submitted files to the NEMAC. It's all 50 states are eligible. And so if your school has adopted a book, if you have fourth graders, then you can have access to accessible versions of all of the textbooks. that are appropriate for your student's grade level. Generally, you'll need to go through your librarian or somebody's designated at the district level. So here's an example of a accessible social studies text that was used. So this was done in inclusive settings. This is the same social studies text that was used by those students, everyone in the classroom. And students were taught to ask questions themselves and then read to find the answers. So there's a structured way of teaching the students to digest that informational text. We know that headings are really important in informational text, especially in textbooks. And so we want to think about maybe the words in the heading, and then what's a question we'd want to ask about the heading. And we can teach students to take a heading and turn it into a question. So for example, if the heading is American Indians in the environment, maybe we could say, who were the American Indians? Or when did the American Indians live? That one doesn't make as much sense, but you can teach them how to switch, put those words in front and see if that helps the heading make more sense. And that's a great pre-reading strategy. So having students look at all the headings, go through and see if they can turn those into questions. And then after we've read each heading, we try to answer those questions so that we're summarizing and practicing comprehension as we go. All right, so let's review these lesson objectives. First was that you'll be able to design meaningful activities to assess the comprehension of grade level texts, incorporate evidence-based practices, including the system of least prompts, and use technology to support students in independence and alternate achievement literacy.